My name is Romans and I am creator of the concept and implementation of Agile Data PHP framework for business logic design. And in this series of videos, I will show you how to practically use Agile Toolkit. And we will be building a business logic for a very simple online accounting application. I have prepared ER diagram, so I will start by looking at what type of entities would like to be able to create inside the database, but we will focus on the creation of the business logic API, as well as thinking how to make this API as simple for developers as possible. So in your role inside the project would be a backend engineer who's supposed to create the business logic and then to give it to some other developers so they can actually produce the code that creates it. And that could be either an API or a command line tool or maybe some web UI. So it could be anything. But we will build a very solid business logic around this model over here. So for the beginning, I wanted to create like a list of targets for ourselves for the series of videos, simply to agree what we would like to build and how it will actually work. So, given the structure over here, I will be going over one item at a time, and let's start with the system. So, we want to build an online solution like a software as a service, and that's why we should be able to have multiple company files online, and then each file or each user of our system should be able to create a bunch of contacts, and these contacts might have some invoices and payments for those invoices. But we need an entity like a system, which is a fundamental piece, and it will be important that a user who belongs to one system is not able to access another system. Okay, so and here I will type the business logic code the way I'd like it to actually work. So my system okay, so the DB here would represent the actual connection to the database, and I'm creating a new object that represents entry in the system, and I'm loading the record number 10. Okay, so that's my first requirement. I should be able to take one system and load it like this. Now at this point I'd like to do let me do this. I'm just going to use because we'll design everything around the PHP unit and unit testing, so I'm going to use the assert equals, and then here okay, so what I'm trying to achieve in here is that my object for system would contain the contact information inside itself, right? So apart from ID, if you look at the database, we have ID and a reference to owner contact info ID, but I don't really want to traverse. Instead, I just want to have the fields like that over here. Additionally, I'd like to have country name, also available right inside the system. And to complicate things, I want this to be one select query only, right? So loading the system should happen with one select, and then within this system I should have access to obviously ID, but also all the contact information including the fields address 1, 2, 3, and also the name of the country. Let's actually change it to country because country name is kind of weird. This is my first requirement, and that's about the system. So the second requirement is, now that we have a system defined, I should be able to traverse and get into the client documents and invoice. So let's say I want to add a new client. So I go to client, and create a new client with the name John Smith. This should give me the ID of the client, right? And then I suppose it should be also able to load them as well. So John. All right. Let's do like this. Okay, anyway. So what am I trying to achieve here? First of all, I'd like to be able to take my system, traverse into the relationship, which is a client, and insert a new client of John Smith over here, right? And that would create a new client. Now, the client should also be an object of some class. To be honest, at this point, I don't care. I have my system. I'm traversing in the clients. The system, my API should be able to figure out what model to use. But if I look inside John's, okay, John would be over here, system ID. So if I look at the John's system ID, it should be equal to 10 automatically, right? So I don't have to worry about linking my new client with the system. It should happen automatically because I have created a client within the scope of the system. So it should be like that. The other thing is type. I have a type over here, which is enum, and it can be either client or supplier. And because we have used client over here, this enum should be equal to client. So if I look at the John's type, by default it should be a client. And then obviously I can also make a validation for the name, and it should be the one which I have selected here or specified. So the name should also be set. That's our second requirement, ability to create a new client, and Agile Data will help us do that as well. My requirement number 3 will be regarding creating invoice and payments. And In here, I'd like you to look at the structure of this. So every time invoice or payment is added, it needs to be created inside both tables. So the document needs to be created first with the reference number, and there is a type in here as well, which is either invoice or the payment. It is linked with a contact, so which contact's document it is, and whether or not it's archived is in here as well. It should be by default 0, and if the document I have created is an invoice, it needs to be linked with the invoice. Apart from having the type invoice, it also should be linked in here, so there should be relations. This relation should be satisfied. And for invoice we should have net and VAT values. Right. There is also another value which is called gross, but that value should be calculated on the fly. For the payments, the structure is similar, but we have amount in here. Yes, and I forgot to add the date, which is also important column, and it needs to be inside the document. So every invoice and payment will have date, but instead of defining it in those respective tables over here, I'm doing it inside this table, and I will be joining those tables. All right, so let's think about how the API should look in the best way. All right, so we have our John in here, and let's do ref invoice. We could actually do clients in here and invoices in here, because it's one-to-many relations. Right, so inv will be an invoice for our models, which means we should be able to add a new one, supposedly through insert. And for this invoice, I'd like to specify ref invoice 1, but I also would like to set net and VAT. It should be 2.3, I believe, depending on the country, but okay, so this should insert a new invoice. Inside the invoices table, as well as a document. And if you see here, I'm specifying both the reference and the net, which means that Agile data should figure out which column goes into which table, automatically link them together, set the default value for the date, as well as type, and is archived. All right, so that's my invoice. And I will actually combine that together. Right. Also, I will be looking to do one payment. So John has an invoice for 10, but he has paid only 5, and this column is not called net, it's called amount. Right? So I have inserted one invoice, one payment, and that's my requirement number 3. Now, my requirement number 4 okay, so that's traverse, joins, and so on. My requirement number 4 is John reload. So what this does, it refreshes the data from the database, because we did some modifications to entities related to John. We need to refresh the John record again, and at this point I would like to be able to do a couple of more certs. So first, this invoice I have created has net of 10, VAT is 2.3, amount to pay needs to be 12.3, let's say euros. And I would like John entry to have a field called total sale. And that field should be total of all the invoices gross number. So it needs to be 12.3 in here at this point. Okay, and then I want to have a column called total paid, which needs to be equal to 5. Oops. And then finally, I want to see the column called due, which should be equal to 7.3. And that's the amount of money John owes me right now. Okay, so this is my plan for the next couple of videos. I will be actually creating the definition, and this will actually be my test script, so I will be trying to make this work. Okay, so loading up the system, pulling up the fields, and as you can see, the code over here is maximally readable, and it has very little to do with the database. So if you look at the database, you have all these tables over here, and it's arranged in a specific way. Agile data must make it simple for a developer to interact with, and that's why we're working with just a couple of models. So the system, client, invoices and payments, and then our client record should also be able to aggregate some of the data and calculate it for us. So continue to the next video.